My name is Acacia Inman, and I am 38 years old. Last Thanksgiving, I carried a sweet potato pie into my parents' boathouse in Essex, Connecticut, stepped half a foot the wrong way, and my sister slapped me in front of 80 people. My mom told me to apologize or get out. My dad crossed the room, opened the door, and held it for me until I was through it. I set the pie down on the table. I said, "Happy Thanksgiving." I walked out, and the music never even stopped. Here is what none of them knew that night. Every board they were standing on belonged to me. The deed, the mortgage, the insurance, the line on the town card that says who owns the property. All of it had my name on it, and it had for 12 years. At 8 o'clock the next morning, I sat down at my kitchen table with a pen and started taking my name back. One form at a time. It took 15 days. What it cost me is the part nobody in my family will say out loud. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge. This is the place for the quiet ones, the women who kept the paperwork, kept the peace, and finally stopped keeping both. If that sounds like someone you know, drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. Stay with me. This one does not end where you think it does. The boathouse smells like fried onions and fresh paint every November. My mother strings lights along the rafters the week before, and by Thanksgiving the whole building glows like something out of a catalog. 80 people came that year. Neighbors, old Marine customers, 2 women from the town council, a photographer my sister hired for the website. I got there at 4 with a pie I had started at 5 that morning because I make the crust by hand and my mother has opinions about store crust. I was carrying it across the main floor toward the long table when Bryn turned around fast with a tray of wine glasses. I stepped half a foot to the left. She stepped the same half foot. Her elbow caught the pie plate, the tray went sideways, and 4 glasses hit the floor and went everywhere. Then she slapped me. Not a shove, not a swat. A full open hand across my cheekbone that turned my head. The room did that thing rooms do, where the talking drains out in a circle from the middle. Somebody by the bar actually laughed, because for about 2 seconds it looked like a bit. Then it didn't. My face was hot, and my ear was ringing, and the pie was still in my hands, somehow, perfectly level. "Watch where you're going," Bryn said. "Are you blind?" I stood there and looked around for the one person in that building who was going to say something. My father was by the window. Wanda from the kitchen had come out with a towel and stopped. 60 of the 80 people were staring straight at me, and I realized, standing on my own floor, holding my own pie, that I had spent 38 years looking for that person in the wrong room. My mother came through the crowd the way she always does, smiling at 2 people on the way so it would look casual. She got to us and she fixed Bryn first, straightened her collar, touched her wrist, said something low that made my sister's shoulders drop half an inch. Only then did she turn to me, and her voice was pleasant and carrying, pitched for the room. "Apologize to your sister," she said, "or get out of here. I want to be exact about this, because I have gone over it 100 times since." She did not ask what happened. She did not look at my face, which by then had a handprint coming up on it. She looked at the broken glass and the 80 people and she made the fastest repair available. My father was already moving. He did not come toward me. He went to the door, the wide one that opens onto the east deck, and he pulled it back, and he stood there holding it. He would not look up. He held that door the way a man holds a door for a stranger carrying boxes, polite and patient, waiting for me to please be done. My father held the door for me. I set the pie down on the table beside the rolls. I said, "Happy Thanksgiving," to nobody in particular, and my voice came out completely level, which surprised me more than the slap had. Then I walked out past him into the cold. On the steps I stopped for a second and looked up at the sign over the deck, the carved one, the one my mother had made in 2019. It said the Ingram Boathouse, and under that, EST, 2019. I stood there in the dark and thought something I did not say out loud to a living soul until the very last morning of all this. It is 34 miles from that boathouse to my apartment in Wethersfield. Route 9 north, then Interstate 91, about 40 minutes with no traffic. And on Thanksgiving night, there is no traffic. I did not cry in the car, and I am not going to pretend I did. I drove and I did the thing I do, which is inventory. Here is what I do for a living. I am a commercial property and casualty underwriter for Bantam Mutual Casualty in Hartford. 15 years. What that means in plain English is that somebody wants insurance on a warehouse, a marina, a restaurant, a banquet hall, and it is my job to decide what could go wrong there and what that risk is worth. I read applications, I order inspections, I pull loss runs, which is the history of every claim a property has ever filed. I look at a wooden function room, and I know how many people it holds, how the exits flow, what the fire load is under the deck stairs, and roughly what it will cost the world if I get the number wrong. I am good at it. I have been told I am unusually good at it. I have priced hurricane exposure on a boatyard in Stonington and a grease fire risk in a diner in New Britain, and I have never once been sentimental about any of it, because sentiment is how carriers go under. Somewhere around Middletown that night, I noticed my hands were steady on the wheel and my jaw was aching from holding it shut. And I thought, I have spent 15 years opening a file on everybody else's disaster. There was one file I had never opened. I got home a little after 9. I put ice in a dish towel and held it to my face for 10 minutes, and then I opened my laptop. And I did not open my email or my messages. I opened my bank. Here is what an underwriter does when she is upset. She pulls the numbers. Automatic payment, the first of every month. Mortgage on 14 Ferry Lane, Essex, Connecticut. Original loan $272,000, taken out in 2013. Balance that night, about $194,000. Payment with escrow, $1,950 a month. Then I pulled the second one, the renovation loan from 2018, and I sat there looking at both balances stacked on my screen like 2 floors of the same building. My family paid me $1,200 a month in rent from June of 2013 until May of 2019. 6 years, more or less on time. Then the boathouse opened as an event space, and the rent stopped. And I let it stop, because they told me the venue income would be how they finally bought me out. That was 6.5 years ago. I have covered the whole payment alone since then. I did the arithmetic 3 times because I did not believe it. It is a little over $150,000. Then I went to the Town of Essex land records, which anyone can search from a couch at 11 o'clock at night, and I typed in the address. Owner of record. One name. Mine. No co-owner. No parent. No sister. My mother had told me to get out of a building that, on every piece of paper in the state of Connecticut, was mine. You have to understand how it happened, and it did not happen the way people assume. My father ran Inman Marine Services out of a shed behind that house for 26 years. He hauled boats, he winterized engines, he was well liked, and he was a terrible businessman. In 2012, the yard lost its 2 biggest accounts. By March of 2013, there was a notice taped to the door and a date on it. My grandmother Vesta had died the year before and left me $68,000, which at 26 was more money than I could hold in my head. I had been at Bantam Mutual 3 years. I had good credit and no debt, and a salary of $58,000. And I sat down with a loan officer in Middletown and found out I could do it. The house went for $340,000 at the foreclosure sale. I put down the 68, and I signed for the rest. My mother stood in that kitchen with a dish towel over her shoulder and said, "It's only on paper, honey, 2 years, just until your father's back on his feet." Everybody clapped. My sister hugged me and cried. My father shook my hand like I was a bank. I want to tell you that I felt used that day, but I did not. I felt necessary. I was the one who could read the closing documents, and the one whose name the bank would take, and being needed like that went down sweeter than being loved, and it stayed sweet for years. 2 years turned into 12. Nobody in that kitchen ever brought it up again, and neither did I, because I was afraid of what they would be without me holding it. I did not scream at anyone. I did not post anything. I did not text my sister a single word, that night or ever again. I got up at 6 on Black Friday, made coffee, and printed 4 copies of a 2-page document I had already written once before. In March of 2014, I signed a limited power of attorney so my mother could handle town paperwork on the property while I was at work in Hartford. Permits, tax filings, the kind of thing that needs a signature during business hours 40 minutes away. It was recorded in the Essex Land Records because in Connecticut, anything touching real property generally should be. At 8 o'clock exactly, I emailed a written revocation of that power of attorney, and I sent it by name, not to a general inbox, to the Essex Town Clerk, to the Assessor, to my loan servicer, to Melander and Sons Insurance Agency in Old Saybrook, and to my parents. Then I put the hard copies in the car and drove down Route 9 and stood at the counter in the town hall at 9:40 and had it recorded against the property, stamped, dated, filed. It took 9 minutes and cost less than lunch. And while the clerk was scanning it, I asked her one more thing, and I asked it in the flattest voice I own. I asked whether there was a revocation already on file from 2023, because I wrote this exact letter 2 years ago. I signed it, I put it in an envelope, and I handed it to my mother at Christmas, and she said she would run it down to the clerk on Monday. The clerk searched twice. There was nothing there. My mother called at 11:20. Not my sister, who had hit me. Not my father, who had held the door. My mother, 3 hours after the filing hit the servicer's inbox, which tells you exactly how fast that house is wired. She did not say hello, and she did not mention Thanksgiving at all. She said, "The bank called me this morning and told me I'm not authorized anymore. What have you done?" I said I revoked a power of attorney I signed 11 years ago. She said, "Why would you do that to us?" Not a question, the way she said it. Then her voice went warm, which is the part I want you to hear, because that is the sound of my mother working. She told me she understood I was upset. She told me Bryn had been under enormous pressure with the bookings. She told me the venue had 18 months of deposits, and that if I made trouble, Bryn would lose the business, and June would lose her home, and my father was 69 years old, and where exactly did I think he was going to go? And then she said the thing she has been saying my whole life, in the same tone you would use to explain weather. "Somebody in this family has to carry the paper." I said I had been carrying it for 12 years. She said, "And you were always the one who could." Then she said she needed the authorization back in place before the January renewal, and I said, "What renewal?" There was a pause on that line about a second and a half long. She said, "The insurance, honey, it's nothing, it's just forms." Monday morning, I went to work, because that is what I do with a bad weekend. My desk is on the 4th floor of a beige building in Hartford, and I have sat at it long enough that the chair has taken my shape. Let me tell you how my world actually works, because everything that happens after this runs on it. Insurance is not built on trust. It is built on 3 things: disclosure, which is what the applicant tells us; inspection, which is what we go look at ourselves; and the signature of the named insured, which is the person swearing the first thing is true. When those 3 line up, we can price almost anything. When one of them is a lie, the whole policy is a piece of paper with a number on it and nothing behind it. We ask about prior losses in 5-year windows, and the question is written a specific way on purpose. Any loss, whether or not it was paid by insurance. Nobody lies on an application with a sentence. They lie with an empty box. I pulled the venue up the way I would pull up any risk: public listing, occupancy, function space, outdoor deck, waterfront. "Somebody in this family has to carry the paper," my mother said, and she was right, and I decided to finally read it. That is when I found the certificate of insurance the Inman Boathouse sends out to couples booking weddings, because it is posted right on their booking page, and I read the top line, and I sat back in my chair. Named, insured, Acacia V, Inman. In my job, a small number is still a number. I had just found a very large one with my name on it, and I had never signed a thing. Kurt Melander called me Tuesday afternoon. Melander and Sons has been writing insurance out of a storefront in Old Saybrook since before I was born, and Kurt was at the party Thanksgiving night, standing near the bar with a beer, which I only remembered later. He is 61, and he has the voice of a man who has never once had to explain himself to a regulator. He did not have that voice on the phone. He said my revocation had landed in the middle of a renewal he had in process, and that the carrier had kicked it back, and could I please tell him what was going on with the family. I asked him which carrier. He said Tidewater Specialty had the account since 2019, but Tidewater pulled out of Waterfront Assembly Risks in Connecticut back in June. Whole class of business, gone. He said there were 2 regional carriers left in the state that would even look at a wooden function hall sitting over water. He said he had already submitted the renewal to the other one. And then Kurt Melander, who had known me since I was 9, said the name of the company where I have worked for 15 years. I looked out the window at the parking garage across the street. Somewhere 2 floors below me, in a queue I could see from my own login, there was a submission with my family's address on it and my name on the front of it, moving toward a desk. Maybe mine. "Kurt," I said, "I need a copy of the application." And he went quiet in a way that told me more than the paperwork did. Here is the thing about being the named insured. It is not a courtesy title. The named insured is the person the contract belongs to, the one who gets the notices, the one who can request the file. I have told 100 business owners that, and I had never once used it myself. So I told Kurt what I would have told any of them. I am the named insured on that policy, and the owner of record on that property. And I am requesting a complete copy of the application, the certificate holders list, and every submission made in my name for the last 5 years. He said he would get to it by the weekend. I said Friday would be fine, and then I hung up, and I wrote the exact same request in a letter, and I sent it certified, because I have watched 15 years of people find out too late that a phone call is not a record. That is the part nobody tells you about my work. It is not clever. It is not dramatic. It is a woman at a kitchen table putting the same sentence in writing, twice, with a date on it. But Kurt said one more thing before we got off the phone, and he said it easy, the way you mention weather, because to him it was nothing. He said, "Just so you know, I always send those to your mother. She signs for you. She's been signing for you for years." My father asked me to meet him Wednesday at the diner on the main road in Deep River, which is where he has taken every hard conversation of his life. He was in the booth by the register with his coffee already half gone. He is 69. He looks smaller than he used to, and his hands shake a little now when he lifts a cup, and I love him, and I want you to hold both of those things at once, because I had to. We talked about diesel prices. We talked about a Chris Craft he is helping somebody restore for free. 20 minutes of that. Then I said, "Dad, my mother has been signing my name on insurance applications." And my father looked out the window at the parking lot for a long time. He said, "Your mother handles the paper." I said, "Did you know?" He said, "That's her end of it." Which is not no. He is not a cruel man. He is a man who found out in 2013 that he could not save his own business and decided the safest thing he could ever do again was hold still. I paid for both coffees. And when we got up, he moved fast, ahead of me, and he got to the glass door first and pushed it open and stood there waiting. My father held the door for me. If you have ever been the one in your family who reads the paperwork, you already know exactly what that booth felt like. Tell me in the comments, what did you sign that you should not have signed? And subscribe, because the part that broke me is still coming. The loan file came back from my servicer on Thursday. In 2018, I signed a renovation loan for $185,000 against that property, and I want to be honest with you, I signed that one myself, in person, at a table, with a pen, knowing what it was. They were turning the old boathouse into an event space. My mother had a folder with projections in it. The deal was that the venue income would buy me out by 2023, and I asked for that schedule in writing, and I got it. And it was a real schedule with real numbers, and it died 4 months later without a word. That is on me. But the file had a second document in it. In September of 2022, that renovation loan was refinanced into a new note for $210,000. My signature is on page 4. I know exactly where I was that week, because it was the Northeast Property Conference in Providence, and I still have the badge in a drawer with the lanyard curled around it. I was in a ballroom listening to a man from Boston talk about coastal wind deductibles while my name went onto a note for $210,000, 40 miles away. And the signature is good. That is what got me. It is not a scrawl. The A has the little flat top I have made since high school. My mother has been signing town forms as me since 2014, permits and assessor cards and abatement filings, dozens of them, year after year. Nobody practices a signature that many times by accident. She had gotten better at being me than I had ever bothered to be at protecting it. Bryn caught me in the grocery store lot in Old Saybrook on Friday, which means somebody told her where I would be. She did not apologize. I want to be fair to my sister, so I will tell you what she actually did, which was worse and more human than an apology. She explained. She stood between two parked cars in a wool coat with her keys in her fist, and she told me she had 18 months of bookings and $41,000 of deposits already spent on a new caterer contract and a tent and the parking easement, and that June is in 5th grade at the school down the road and has a best friend 2 houses over. She said she works 90 hours in wedding season. She said, I built that place. And the thing is, in the way she means it, she did. She answers the phone at 9 at night when a bride is crying. That is real work. That is not nothing. Then she said, You've never once come to look at what we made. Are you blind? And she meant it completely differently than she meant it at the party, and both times she was accusing me of not seeing, and only one of us was right. I said I owned the building. She said, on paper. My mother's exact words, 11 years apart, out of a different mouth. Then Bryn made her only mistake of the entire conversation. She got angry, and she waved her hand toward the river, and she said, It was a little fire. 4 years ago. Nobody even got hurt. I went down Saturday at low tide, which that week was a little after 3 in the afternoon. I did not go to the house. I parked up on Ferry Lane and walked down the public right-of-way to the riverbank in boots, and I went under the east deck the way I have gone under 200 other decks in 15 years, on my hands and knees with a flashlight in my teeth. It smells like cold mud and creosote under there. The tide was out, and the mussels were ticking on the pilings. The east deck is the big one, the one that hangs over the water, the one in every photograph on their booking page. It is where they put the dance floor. I got about 8 feet in, and I found it. 2 new joists, sistered onto the outside of the old ones, bolted through in 3 places where there should have been more, and the whole underside painted white. The paint was the tell. Nobody paints the underside of a deck. Nobody has ever painted the underside of a deck in the history of Connecticut. I scraped at it with a thumbnail, and it came away in a chip the size of a dime, and under the white there was black. And the black was soft and grained the way wood goes when it has burned and then gotten wet for 4 winters. I put my whole hand on it. My fingers came away black. A structural member does not care whose family owns it. It carries what it can carry, and then it stops. I sat under there in the mud with my hand black and my heart going, and over my head I heard footsteps on the planking, and my mother's voice, bright and carrying, the voice she uses for clients. She was walking someone across the dance floor. She was saying, and we can seat 210 right here on the 13th. I did not sleep Saturday. At 2 in the morning I did what I do, which is the only thing that has ever calmed me down. I got a legal pad and I built the exposure. 210 people. An outdoor deck in December, which means a tent, which means propane heaters, which means load and ignition source in the same place. A dance floor, which is not static weight, it is rhythmic live load, and any engineer will tell you that is the worst kind. 2 joists with burn damage of unknown depth, sistered by somebody who was paid in cash, no permit, no inspection, no engineer's stamp, painted over. Then I wrote a probability at the bottom and I looked at it and I crossed it out. Because I did not have enough information to write it, and I am not the kind of person who writes numbers she cannot support. That is the whole job. And that is when I understood the door. My father held the door for me. I had been carrying that around for a week thinking it was about manners, that he was too weak to stand up to my mother, that he was letting me go. He was not letting me go. A man holding a door is making sure it closes behind you. He had been closing that door on me since 2013, politely, one Thanksgiving at a time, and I had been thanking him on the way out. I want to be honest with you about something, because this is the part people skip. Sitting there at 2 in the morning, there was still a version of this where I kept everything, and I wanted it. Wanda Trask has run the kitchen at that boathouse since the day it opened. She is 74. She worked the line at a shoreline restaurant for 30 years before that, and she has never in her life been impressed by anybody. I found her in the market Sunday buying 2 chickens, and I asked her about October of 2021. She did not ask why. She put the chickens in the cart, and she told me. A wedding. The second Saturday in October. About 160 people. Chafing fuel on the buffet table at the top of the east stairs. Somebody moved a tray and a canister went over and rolled, and it went down under the stair stringer where the leaves were, and the leaves went up. She said it burned maybe 4 minutes. She said a groomsman got the extinguisher from her kitchen wall and put it out, and everybody applauded and the band started again. Nobody called the fire department, she said, because it was already out. What would they have come for? 2 days later, Denny Rail came with his truck and worked 2 days and got paid out of the cash box, and by the next weekend there was fresh white paint under there. She said all of it flat, like a woman reading a delivery ticket. Then she turned and looked right at me and said, "You asking about this for insurance?" I said I was. Wanda did not answer that. She just stood there holding the cart handle. Not surprised at all, and I understood she had been waiting 4 years for somebody to finally ask her. The envelope from Melander and Sons came Monday. Kurt sent everything, which I think was his way of getting it off his own desk and onto mine. The application was dated November 14th, 2025, 13 days before Thanksgiving. Applicant, the Inman Boathouse. Named insured, Acacia 5. Inman, doing business as the Inman Boathouse. My address on it was the Ferry Lane address, which is a place I have not slept in 12 years. There was a page of general information, a page of construction and occupancy, and then, near the bottom of the 3rd page, the loss history section. Has the applicant sustained any loss in the past 5 years, whether or not paid by insurance? There was a box for yes and a box for no. The no box had a neat black check in it. And on the last page, on the line that says applicant's signature, was my name in my own handwriting, made by somebody else's hand, dated the 14th of November. I read that page twice, slowly, the way you read something when you have finally decided to see it. Then I checked the effective date on the renewal, because that is the first thing I would check on anybody else's file, and there it was, January 1st, which meant the current Tidewater policy was still in force through December 31st, which meant that on the 13th of December, 210 people were going to stand on that deck under a policy that had been bought with an empty box. Ruth Ann Prosser practices law out of 2 rooms over a hardware store in Essex, and she has done real estate and small business work in this town for 25 years. I paid for an hour and I laid all of it on her table in order, the way I would present a file. She read for a long time without saying anything. Then she put both hands flat on the papers and gave me 2 roads. Road 1. I say nothing. The Tidewater policy runs out on its own at the end of the month. My employer declines the renewal for perfectly ordinary underwriting reasons, and nobody there ever has to know why. In January, the venue quietly dies because it cannot get coverage. My family runs out of road on their own, and in the spring, I sell a house that nobody knows has a problem under it for what the shoreline market will pay. And I walk away with real money and my job and my promotion, and not one person in my family is ever charged with anything. Road 2. I put the whole thing in writing to the people whose job it is to receive it. She was very precise about Road 2. She said the property becomes uninsurable. The bank almost certainly calls the renovation note. My mother is looking at a forgery referral at 66 years old, and my own employer will have to open a file on me. And Acacia, she said, you should understand something. She took her glasses off. You are not required to do any of this. There is no law that makes you. You're only allowed to. Then she asked how many people were coming on the 13th. I told her. She did not say anything else at all. I drove down to Ferry Lane Tuesday evening because I wanted to give my mother the chance nobody had given me. The kitchen has not changed since I was in high school. Same yellow wall clock, same kettle. She made tea without asking if I wanted any. I told her I had the application. I told her I knew about the fire and about Denny Rail and about the paint. She did not deny one single thing, and that is the part I had not prepared for. She went to the drawer under the phone, the one with the rubber bands and the dead batteries, and she took out a folded paper that was soft as cloth from age. It was a note from 1985. $10,000, a boat trailer and a used forklift, and her signature at the bottom. And above it, my father's mother as the lender. She was 26 when she signed it. She said, "Your father needed a cosigner, and I was the one who could." She smoothed it flat on the table with 2 fingers. She said, "Nobody asked me either, Acacia. They just handed me the pen, and everybody was so happy." And for about a minute, I loved my mother more than I had in 20 years, and I understood exactly where I came from. And I understood that this house has been handing a pen to a woman in this family for 2 generations. Then she folded the paper back up and put it in the drawer and closed it. And she said, "Somebody in this family has to carry the paper." Same voice, same sentence. Like the last minute had not happened at all. Then she said she needed me to stay quiet for 6 more weeks. Not until the 13th. Not until the wedding. 6 weeks. I sat there doing the arithmetic and realized there was something else out there, past January, that I had not found yet. The offer came Wednesday, and it came properly, which is how I knew my mother had been getting ready for this longer than I had. Bryn drove to Wethersfield and handed me a folder in my own parking lot. 1 page of terms and a booking calendar behind it. After the 13th and after the spring season, the family would buy my interest in 14 Ferry Lane for $120,000, paid over 3 years, with a lawyer, with a recorded release, with interest. The calendar showed 11 weddings booked for May through October at an average of $9,000. The numbers worked. That is what I need you to understand. It was not a con, and it was not an insult. It was a real offer that a reasonable person would take. Bryn stood there with her hands in her coat pockets and said, "Mom says you can have it in writing this time." And then she said, the only thing that actually reached me. She said June had asked whether they were moving. She left. I sat in my own parking lot in my coat for a while after her taillights were gone, and then I caught myself calculating the effective rate on that payout schedule, which is a thing my brain does when it is trying not to feel anything. And I want to be honest with you here, because this is where people lie in stories like this. I did not throw the folder away. I put it on my kitchen table. It was a good offer. It was also the exact price of my silence, and by then, I knew the difference. Thursday morning, I opened my queue at 7:40 and it was there. New submission, commercial package, effective the 1st of January. Inman Boathouse, Essex, Connecticut. Waterfront assembly occupancy. Applicant listed as A. Inman. It had routed to my team because my team writes Shoreline Hospitality, and it had come to my team because Melander and Son sends us everything now, and there is nothing mysterious about it at all. That is how insurance works in a small state. 2 carriers left in the class, 1 agency in the corner of the shoreline, and every road runs through the same 4 buildings in Hartford. I did not open the file. I sat there with my hands off the keyboard for about 3 minutes, and I understood, completely and in detail, what would happen if I said nothing. I could reassign it with 2 clicks. It would go to Marisol on the other side of the floor, who would decline it in 4 days for occupancy reasons, and that would be that. And no human being on this earth would ever know I had touched it. My promotion review was on the 19th. I sat there and understood that I could fix all of this quietly, and nobody would ever know. If you have ever had that exact minute in your own life, you know how loud a quiet office gets. Stay with me here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, because the next part is the one I cannot take back. Then I stood up. And I did not walk toward my manager's office. I walked the other way, down the corridor to compliance. Georgia Poole has been the compliance officer at Bantam Mutual for 19 years, and she has an office with nothing personal in it except a photograph of a sailboat. She is 58, and she has the manners of a woman who has heard everything and been shocked by none of it. I sat down and I said it in one go because I had practiced it in the elevator. There is a submission in my team's queue for a property in Essex. I am the owner of record of that property. I am listed as the named insured. I have a financial interest in a risk on this company's books, and I am disclosing it to you now. Georgia did not say, "Oh no." She did not say, "I'm so sorry." She turned to her keyboard and opened a form and started typing, and the sound of that keyboard was the sound of a door closing somewhere behind me and locking. She asked me the date I became aware. She asked whether I had accessed the file. She asked whether I had ever underwritten anything connected to it. And I said no, and that was true. And it was the last easy answer I gave. Because then Georgia Poole stopped typing and looked at me over the top of her glasses. And she asked, "Do you have knowledge of any misstatement on that application?" I had a copy of it in my bag, 11 inches from her foot. Everything after that day came out of the next 4 seconds. I said yes. It took 20 minutes after that, and nobody in the building raised their voice once. The file was pulled from my team. My access to the account was locked before I got back to my desk. Dale Fontaine, who hired me as an assistant when I was 23, and who came to my divorce lunch in 2018 and paid for it, walked me down to the small conference room and told me he was sorry, and that he had no discretion here. And both of those things were true. The middle market team lead review, the one I had been working toward for 4 years, went to hold pending the outcome. Then paid administrative leave, effective immediately, standard, no fault implied, all correct, all by the book. I want to be clear that nobody wronged me. That is exactly what made it unbearable. If somebody had been unfair, I would have had something to push against. Instead, I got a cardboard box, and the kind of politeness you give a person at a funeral. 15 years. I was very good at that job. I packed the box in the elevator lobby, and I noticed halfway down that I had put my files in alphabetical order, and I stood there in that beige hallway and laughed at myself until my eyes watered. June called me that night from my sister's phone. She is 11. She talks the way I did at 11, in complete sentences, with too much information in them. She wanted to know if I was coming on Saturday because they were putting the lights up on the tent poles on Friday, and the good lights, not the ones from the shed. She told me about a duck that lives under the east deck and comes out when Wanda throws bread. She told me she got a 94 on a math test and then told me which problem she got wrong and why. And then she said, "Aunt Acacia, why don't you come to Thanksgiving anymore?" I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the dishwasher. I told her that grown-ups sometimes disagree about a house, and that none of it was about her, and that I loved her, and every word of that was true, and it was maybe 40% of the answer. I have never hated myself more than I did for the other 60. Then June went quiet for a second, and she said it the way kids say the thing they have been holding the whole call. She said, "Grandma says you're trying to take our house." Ned Aubrey is a structural engineer in Middletown who has stamped reports for me for 9 years, and he owed me nothing, and he came out Friday morning anyway, because I asked him to. He is 60 and built like a fence post. He went under that deck with a moisture meter and a scratch awl, and he stayed under there 15 minutes without saying one word, and I stood on the bank with my arms crossed and listened to him tap. When he came out, he sat on an overturned bucket and cleaned his hands with a rag for a while before he talked. He said the original joists have lost section in the burned zone, and he cannot tell how much without opening it up. He said the sisters are the right lumber and the wrong installation, 3 bolts where the span wants more, and nothing at the bearing end where it actually matters. He said there is no permit, no inspection, no stamp, and no way for him to certify anything from the outside. Then Ned said the most brutal sentence anybody said to me in all of this, and he said it kindly, because he is a kind man, and he was trying to give me comfort. He said, "It'll probably hold." In my job, a small number is still a number. That is the whole reason my job exists. Nobody buys insurance against the things that definitely happen. He put his rag in his back pocket and looked up the bank at the tent poles going up on the lawn. And he said, "So what are you going to do with this?" And I understood that he had just handed the pen to me, too. Friday night, I put both roads on my kitchen table, physically, side by side, because I think better when things have edges. On the left, the folder from Bryn, $120,000 over 3 years, a recorded release, my name off everything by summer. Keep the job, probably, since the review would find nothing and the file would quietly die at somebody else's desk. Nobody charged. Nobody's grandmother in a courtroom at 66. My father keeps his chair by the window. June keeps her school and her duck and her best friend 2 houses down. And one night, tomorrow night, 210 people stand on a deck over cold water in December, under a tent full of propane heaters, dancing, on 2 joists that a man got paid in cash to cover with white paint. On the right, one legal pad with nothing on it yet. I did not feel brave. I want to be extremely clear about that, because in stories like this, the woman always seems to catch fire at the end, and I did not. I felt tired in my back teeth. I thought about my grandmother's $68,000 and what it bought. I thought about my mother at 26 with a pen in her hand and everybody so happy. I thought about how the only difference between her and me was that I was the one who had learned exactly what an unsupported joist does, and how a person who knows the number cannot unknow it, and how that is either a burden or a job depending on what you do next. Mostly I sat there trying to make Ned's sentence come out 0. I could not make it come out 0. I went to bed at midnight without deciding, and I woke up at 5 in the morning already knowing, and I understood that I had actually decided a week earlier, in the mud, with my hand black to the wrist. At 6:05 on Saturday morning, the 13th of December, I sat down at my kitchen table with cold coffee and wrote 3 documents. The first was a sworn written statement. It went to the Special Investigations Unit at Bantam Mutual Casualty, to Tidewater Specialty, who still had the policy in force until the 31st, and to the Fraud and Investigations Unit at the Connecticut Insurance Department. It said that a fire occurred at the property in October of 2021 and was never reported. It said the loss history question on the application dated November 14th had been answered no, and that the answer was false. It said the signature on that application was not mine, and it said the thing that cost me everything, in the plainest sentence I have ever written. The named insured on that policy is me, and I am employed as a commercial underwriter by one of the carriers receiving this statement. The second document went to the building official and the fire marshal of the town of Essex. As owner of record of 14 Ferry Lane, I reported unrepaired fire damage to the structural framing of the east deck, unpermitted and uninspected, and I withdrew my consent to the use of that structure for public assembly until it had been opened, examined, and certified by a licensed engineer. The third went to my parents and my sister. It terminated their license to use my property for commercial events, and it gave them the notice period the law requires, and not 1 day less. Then I signed all 3 with my full legal name. My hand did not shake. The only strange part was looking down at my own signature and seeing that it was identical to the forgery, which it would be, because she learned it from me. I want to tell you the truth about that minute. It was not triumph. It was a woman at a table doing arithmetic out loud for the first time in her life. I had spent 15 years telling strangers exactly what their risk was worth. That morning, I finally wrote down what mine was, and the number was everything I owned. I drove down at 11 because they were going to hear it from somebody, and I was not going to make it a stranger. The tent was up on the lawn, and there was a van from the florist and a girl carrying folding chairs 2 at a time. The fire marshal's notice was already taped to the glass of the east deck door, orange, with a case number on it. My mother was standing in front of it, reading it with her arms folded. Bryn saw me first. She came across the grass screaming, actual screaming, about the deposits and the bride and 11 o'clock in the morning, and she got close enough that I could see the mascara going, and she did not hit me this time. My mother did not raise her voice for the first 90 seconds. She asked me if I understood what I had done to my sister. She asked if I understood that people would be talking about this family in this town for 20 years. And then, for the first time in my entire life, my mother lost it. She shouted that I was destroying the family over a piece of wood and a grudge. She shouted that I had always been cold. And then she said it again, the way she has said it to me since I was 26. Except this time, it came out ragged. Somebody in this family has to carry the paper. I did not raise my voice. I have never once raised my voice at my mother, and I was not going to start with a florist watching. I said, "I'm done carrying it." I signed it instead. Behind her, my father stood up from the picnic table. He walked past all of us to the door of the house, and he opened it, and he stood there holding it, waiting. My father held the door for me. I looked at him for a second. On the steps of that building on Thanksgiving night, I had thought one sentence and swallowed it. And it was this: every name on every paper here is mine. 15 days later, I had finally said it out loud, in writing, to 4 different offices, and it had cost me every dollar it was ever worth. Then I walked to my car instead, and I left them all standing on my grass. Here is the accounting. The fire marshal barred use of the east deck at 10:40 that morning pending engineering certification. The wedding on the 13th did not happen. I called the bride myself at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, because it was my property and my letter, and I sat on my kitchen floor and let a 29-year-old woman in a hotel room in Old Saybrook say every single thing she needed to say to me, and she was right about most of it. Tidewater voided the policy for material misrepresentation before Christmas. My own company declined the renewal. No carrier in the state will write a waterfront assembly risk at an address with a fraud referral attached to it, and I knew that when I wrote the letter, because knowing that is literally my job. Without insurance, there is no venue. Without a venue, there is no income. In February, the bank called the renovation note. The house went on the market in March. It sold in May for $402,000, and after both loans and the closing costs, I walked away with a little under $8,000. 12 years. 68,000 of my grandmother's money and 150,000 of my own payments, and I ended with less than a used car. My family lost the business, the house, and the version of themselves the town had agreed to believe. June stopped calling, and I got exactly what I said I wanted on the morning of Black Friday. My name was on nothing but the truth, and the truth turned out to be worth about $8,000. In April, I got one text from my sister's number, and it was not from my sister. No punctuation, no greeting, exactly the way an 11-year-old sends a thing she has been carrying around for 4 months. It said, "Was the deck really going to break?" I sat and looked at that for a long time on a Tuesday evening in a rented apartment. You have no idea how badly I wanted to type yes. Yes, June, it was going to break, and I saved 210 people, and your grandmother is a criminal. And here is a photograph of the burned wood so you will know your aunt is not the villain in the story they are telling you at that dinner table. I could have. She would have believed me. That is the last thing I gave up. I typed, "I don't know." Nobody could know without opening it up. That is why I stopped it. Send. And then I sat there with the phone face down and finally understood the shape of my own life. In my job, a small number is still a number. I had said that sentence to underwriting trainees for a decade, and I had never once applied it to myself. For 12 years, I had run my own risk at zero. Zero chance they would ever ask for more. Zero cost to being the one who signs. I had rounded myself down to nothing so that nobody in that kitchen would ever have to look at what they were actually standing on, and I called it love, and it was not love. It was a structural member holding up a building nobody wanted to inspect. 3 dots appeared on the screen. Then they stopped. Then, a minute later, June sent back, "Okay." The state opened a file in January. It went the way these things go when nobody is famous and nobody died. My mother was charged with forgery in the 2nd degree and with obtaining property by false pretenses. At 66, With no record, she was granted accelerated rehabilitation, which in Connecticut means the charges come off if you stay clean, and she got 2 years of probation and an order to pay back $41,000 in deposits to the couples whose weddings never happened. The 6 weeks she had asked me for turned out to be a home equity application dated the 2nd of February with my name typed into the borrower line. It never got filed, and the fraud unit has it now. She has never once said the word forgery out loud. In town, she says there was a misunderstanding about paperwork and that her older daughter is very literal. Some people believe her. Some people always will. Bryn was never charged because nobody could prove she held the pen, and I believe that she never did. She lost the business and the liquor permit and the 11 bookings, and she manages the front of a restaurant in Old Saybrook now, and she is good at it, and she does not speak to me. My father is 69 and works 3 days a week at a marina in Deep River, hauling and shrink-wrapping boats, which is the only part of any of this that makes sense to me. They rent a place on the north side of town. June changed schools in September. Bantam Mutual finished its review in February and found that I had violated no policy and disclosed properly, which is a sentence I could have framed. The team lead position went to Marisol, who deserved it, and who has never mentioned it to me once. I stayed until June and then I left, because there is a difference between being cleared and being the woman whose family file went to the fraud unit. I do risk control now for a small firm in Middletown. I walk warehouses and function halls and church basements with a clipboard and a flashlight, and I write down what is actually there. It pays $12,000 a year less. Last week, I was in a cold storage building in Cromwell, and a man who owns 4 freezers asked me to write down a number he did not want to hear, and I wrote it down, and nobody in that building needed me to be the one who could carry it. The carved sign is gone off the boathouse. I saw the new owners took the east deck all the way down to the pilings in the fall, which is exactly what an engineer would have told them to do. I spent 15 years pricing what might happen to strangers, and it took one slap in a room full of neighbors to make me open the only file that had my own name on it. And I will tell you the one thing I know now. The number you refuse to write down is the number that ends up costing you everything. That is my story. One slap. One signature that was not mine. One Saturday morning at 6 o'clock with a pen. If this reminded you that there is a line with your name on it somewhere, a deed, a loan, a policy, a form your family swears is nothing, go read it today. Send this to the person in your family who does the paperwork. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.